I didn't scream, I started planning. The room was quiet. Too quiet for everything that had just happened. But I didn't let myself sink into that silence. Because silence was where I had lost everything before. Silence was where they had rewritten my life without me even noticing. And I wasn't going to let that happen again. Not this time. Not when I had been given a second chance that most people would never even dream of. I lay there on the hospital bed, my body still weak from labor, my arms wrapped protectively around my children. But my mind was already moving, faster than ever, sharper than ever, because now I knew the truth. And once you know the truth, you can't go back to being blind. You can only decide what to do with it. And I had already made my choice. I wasn't going to react. I wasn't going to break down. I was going to plan slowly, carefully, perfectly, just like they had. Because if they could steal 25 years of my life with a plan, then I could take everything back with one of my own. The nurse came in again a while later. A different one this time. Her movements normal. Her expression calm. Like nothing unusual had happened at all. And I let her continue. I let the routine checks happen. But only in front of me. Always in front of me. Every step watched. Every detail noted. I didn't argue anymore. I didn't resist openly. Because resistance draws attention. And attention was the last thing I needed right now. What I needed was information. And information only comes when people believe you're not a threat. So I became exactly what they expected, a quiet, exhausted mother, recovering, compliant, harmless, invisible. But behind that mask, I was watching everything. The names on their badges, the way they moved, the small inconsistencies in their behavior. The one nurse who avoided eye contact for just a second too long. The one who hesitated before touching the babies. The one who checked the door before speaking. Tiny details, easy to miss, but not for me, not anymore. Because I had learned the hard way what happens when you ignore the small things. Hours passed like that, slow and controlled, and by the time the sun began to rise again, I already had a list forming in my mind: names, faces, patterns, pieces of something bigger that I was just starting to see. Daniel hadn't come yet, and that alone told me something, because in my previous life, he had been there, concerned, attentive, playing his role perfectly. But now, knowing what I knew, that absence felt different, heavier, intentional, like he was waiting for something to be resolved before stepping in, before pretending everything was normal. And that only confirmed what I had already started to suspect. He was involved, not by accident, not by ignorance, but by choice. The thought should have broken me, should have shattered whatever was left of the life I thought I had. But it didn't, not anymore, because I had already lived through that pain, already died with that truth inside me, and now, all that remained was clarity, cold, precise clarity. I needed proof, not just for revenge, but for control. Because without proof, truth is just a story, and stories can be denied, twisted, erased, just like mine had been. But proof changes everything. Late that morning, when the hospital grew busier and the staff rotated, I made my first move, small, almost invisible, but enough to start something. "Can I see my records?" I asked softly when a nurse came to check on me. My voice gentle, tired, exactly what they expected. She hesitated for a moment, just a moment, before nodding. "I can request them," she said. And I smiled, faintly grateful, harmless. "Thank you," I replied, lowering my eyes as if the request had taken more energy than I had. And just like that, the door opened, not physically, but strategically, because records meant data, and data meant truth, or at least the version of truth they had decided to keep. By the afternoon, a file was brought to me, thin, too thin for something as significant as childbirth, and that alone was enough to confirm my suspicion. Something was missing, something had been removed, edited, cleaned up. I flipped through the pages slowly, carefully, not reacting, not showing anything, just reading, absorbing, memorizing. The timestamps didn't match, the staff list had gaps, and most importantly, there was a section that had clearly been modified, the formatting slightly off, the ink slightly different, subtle, but undeniable. They had changed it, they had erased something, and the moment I realized that, something inside me settled, not panic, not fear, but certainty. I wasn't imagining things. This wasn't just a possibility. This was real, planned, executed, and covered up. And if it had been covered up, that meant there were people involved. More than one, because something like this couldn't happen alone. I closed the file gently, placing it back on the tray beside me, my expression unchanged, my breathing steady, because this was only the beginning. Proof didn't come all at once. It came in pieces, and I had just found my first piece. But what mattered more was what that piece pointed to: a system, a structure, something organized. And that meant there would be traces, patterns, connections. All I had to do was find them. The door opened again sometime later. And this time, when I looked up, my eyes met hers. Laura. She stood there like she had before, calm, composed, perfectly in control. But this time I saw more. I saw the tension beneath the surface, the awareness, the calculation, because something had changed. She knew something wasn't going as planned. And I let my gaze soften slightly, just enough to play my part, just enough to keep her comfortable, because the moment she feels threatened, she adapts. And I needed her not to adapt yet. I needed her to believe she still had control, because people make mistakes when they think they're winning. And I was counting on that. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her voice gentle, almost concerned, and I lowered my eyes slightly, giving her exactly what she expected, tired. I said quietly but happy. She smiled at that, a small, satisfied smile, like something had gone right for her, like the world was still moving according to her plan. And I let her believe it. I let her stand there, thinking she had already won, because that was the only way I was going to take everything back from her. Not by fighting her directly, not yet, but by letting her walk deeper into a game she didn't realize had already changed. And as I looked down at my children again, safe in my arms, still mine, still here, one thought echoed clearly in my mind, calm, steady, unshakable. This time I'm not just surviving, I'm hunting. The truth wasn't hidden, it was erased. That realization didn't scare me, it studied me, because something erased can still leave traces, and traces can be followed. All I had to do was look where no one else bothered to look. I stayed quiet the rest of the day, playing the same role. The exhausted new mother, polite, cooperative, forgettable. The kind of person hospital staff stops paying attention to after a while. And that was exactly what I needed. Because attention creates barriers, but invisibility opens doors. By the second night, I had already mapped out the rhythm of the floor. Which nurses worked which shift, who spoke too much, who avoided eye contact, who checked their surroundings before saying anything. Patterns were everywhere if you knew how to see them, and now I did. The same nurse from earlier, the one who hesitated, appeared again near midnight, her step slightly rushed, her eyes flicking toward the door before entering, and I knew instantly, she was one of them, not necessarily the mastermind, but part of it, part of whatever had happened here before. I didn't confront her, not directly, instead I watched quietly, carefully, the way she handled the chart, the way her fingers lingered just a second too long over certain pages, the way she avoided looking at me for more than a moment, guilt, fear, both. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she knew something, and people who know things can be pushed, not by force, but by pressure, subtle, precise pressure. "Is something wrong?" I asked softly when she finished checking the babies. My voice calm, almost concerned. She froze for a fraction of a second before forcing a small smile. "No. Everything's fine," she replied quickly, too quickly, and I tilted my head slightly, as if unsure, as if I believed her but needed reassurance. "You seem nervous," I added gently, lowering my voice just enough to make it feel personal, not accusatory. Her expression shifted again, that same flicker of discomfort, of fear, and I knew I had found the crack. "It's just a long shift," she said, trying to brush it off, but her fingers tightened around the chart. A small detail, easy to miss, but not for me, not anymore. I let a few seconds pass, just enough to make the silence heavy, just enough to make her feel it. "I heard something earlier," I said quietly, looking down at my children as if the conversation didn't matter much. "About mistakes happening here before." I didn't look at her when I said it. I didn't need to. I could feel the reaction, the way the air in the room shifted, the way her breathing changed slightly sharper, more controlled. She knew exactly what I was talking about, even though I hadn't said it directly. "I don't know what you mean," she replied, but this time her voice wasn't as steady, wasn't as confident, and that was enough, because denial isn't about truth. It's about fear. I nodded slowly, as if accepting her answer, as if I wasn't interested in pushing further, because pushing too hard too soon would break her. And broken people don't talk. They shut down, disappear, become useless. No, I needed her right where she was, uncomfortable, uncertain, but still holding on, because that's when people start making mistakes. She turned to leave quickly after that, too quickly, and I let her go, watching her carefully as she stepped out into the hall. Her shoulders tense, her pace uneven. She was scared now, and fear leads to movement, and movement leads to exposure. I just had to wait. The next morning, I made my second move, again small, again invisible. I asked for water, for assistance, for small things that required interaction, building familiarity, lowering defenses, making myself seem harmless, predictable, someone they didn't need to worry about. And it worked. By midday, I overheard what I needed. Two nurses talking quietly near the door, unaware that I was awake, unaware that I was listening. "Did you hear about her?" one of them whispered. "Which one?" the other asked. "The one from years ago, the incident." My heart didn't race, didn't spike the way it would have before. It stayed steady, controlled, because I had already expected this. I had already known there was something in the past, something similar. I thought that was covered up. The second nurse said, her voice lower now, more cautious. "It was, but someone got paid off." The first replied, and that was it. The confirmation I needed: money. Not a mistake, not an accident, but a transaction, a decision. Something planned and executed with intent. I closed my eyes slowly, not to rest, but to think, to connect the pieces. Laura Daniel, The hospital, the altered records, the nervous nurse, the whispers, the money. It was all starting to form a shape now. Something clearer, something real. And then one final piece clicked into place. Something small but crucial. The nurse from last night, she hadn't denied everything. She had denied knowing what I meant, which meant she knew something specific, something she thought I was referring to. And that meant there was more than one incident, more than one case. This wasn't isolated. This was a pattern, and patterns are easier to prove, easier to expose, because they repeat. They leave trails. They create connections that can't be erased completely. I opened my eyes again, staring up at the ceiling, my mind sharper than ever, because now I wasn't just guessing anymore. I was building a case, piece by piece, slowly, carefully, just like they had built their lie. And as I turned my head slightly, looking at my children sleeping beside me, safe, still here, still mine, one thought settled in, cold and precise. They thought they buried the truth, but all they did was leave me a trail to follow. My children grew up calling someone else mom. The thought didn't hit me all at once. It crept in slowly, quietly, like something my mind had been avoiding until it couldn't anymore. Because knowing they were out there was one thing, but realizing they had lived an entire life without me, that was something else entirely. Something heavier, something that pressed down on my chest in a way that even betrayal hadn't. Because betrayal could turn into anger, into revenge, into something I could act on. But this was loss, pure and irreversible. 25 years of it in my previous life. And even now, even with a second chance, I couldn't get those years back. I couldn't erase the memories they had built with someone else. The way they had learned to speak, to laugh, to trust. All of it shaped by a woman who had stolen my place without hesitation. Laura. The name felt different now. No longer just an enemy, but the center of everything. The one who had taken what was mine and built a life on it. And if I wanted the truth, if I wanted my children back, I had to start with her. I didn't rush. Rushing leads to mistakes. And I couldn't afford mistakes, not now. Not when every move mattered. I waited until the hospital discharged me, until I stepped out into the world again, holding my children close, the sunlight hitting my face in a way that felt unfamiliar, like I had been gone for far longer than just a few days. And in a way I had, because the person who walked into that hospital wasn't the same one walking out. That version of me had died already, and what remained was something sharper, something more aware, something that didn't trust easily and didn't hesitate when it came to protecting what was mine. Daniel was waiting outside, just like before, leaning against the car, his expression carefully composed, concern written across his face in just the right way. The way it would have fooled me once, the way it had fooled me for years, but now, I saw through it instantly. The slight delay before he approached, the way his eyes scanned me, not with worry, but with calculation, like he was checking for something, for signs, for changes. And I gave him nothing, just a tired smile, a small nod. The role he expected, the role I needed him to believe. You okay? He asked softly, reaching out as if to help. And I let him just enough to keep the illusion intact. Just tired, I said, my voice quiet, my expression calm, and he nodded, satisfied, because to him, nothing had changed. Everything was still under control, and that was exactly how I wanted it. The drive home was silent, heavy in a different way than before, not with confusion, but with awareness. Every movement, every glance, every word carefully measured, because now, everything mattered. Once we got home, I settled in quickly, creating a routine, something stable, something normal, because normality hides intentions better than anything else. And within that routine, I started my search slowly, quietly, using what I knew, what I remembered: names, dates, connections, pieces of a life I had already lived once. I didn't need to start from zero. I had an advantage no one else did: memory. And memory can be more powerful than any evidence if you know how to use it. It didn't take long to find her. Not really. Laura had never been someone who hid completely. Not in my previous life, and not now. Her life was visible, polished, almost perfect from the outside. A beautiful home, a respected social circle, a reputation built carefully over the years. The image of a perfect mother. And that image made me smile, not out of admiration, but because I knew exactly how fragile it was. Because I knew what it was built on: lies, theft, deception. I stood across the street from her house for the first time a few days later. My children safe at home with a hired nurse I trusted. My eyes fixed on the place that had unknowingly held my life for years. It looked ordinary, peaceful even. Sunlight reflecting off the windows. A garden carefully maintained. Everything exactly where it should be. Except it wasn't. Because inside that house were my children. The ones I had never held, never raised, never known. My breath caught slightly as the front door opened, and two boys stepped out, older, now taller, familiar in a way that hit me instantly. Not because I had seen them before, but because something in me recognized them, something deeper than memory, instinct. They laughed about something, their voices light, carefree, and for a moment, the world around me faded completely. Because that sound should have been mine. Those moments should have been mine. I should have been there, watching them grow, guiding them, loving them. But I wasn't. I hadn't been, and the realization hurt more than anything else. Sharper than betrayal, deeper than anger, because this wasn't something I could fix easily. Not with a plan, not with revenge. This was time, stolen time, and time doesn't come back. One of them turned slightly then, and my heart stopped for just a second, because I saw it clearly. Something in his eyes, in his expression, something that mirrored my own, something that confirmed what I already knew. They were mine. There was no doubt, no hesitation, just certainty. I took a small step forward without realizing it, my body moving before my mind could stop it. But I forced myself to stop, to stay where I was hidden, unseen, because this wasn't the moment. This wasn't how it would happen. I couldn't just walk up and claim them, couldn't just tear their world apart without understanding the consequences. Because to them I was a stranger, and that thought hit harder than anything else. I was their mother, but in their eyes, I was nothing, no one, just another face on the street. And if I rushed this, if I acted on emotion instead of strategy, I could lose them again, not physically this time, but emotionally, permanently. And I couldn't risk that, not after everything. The door opened again, and Laura stepped out, her presence instantly changing the atmosphere. Her hand resting lightly on one of the boys' shoulders, a gesture so natural, so familiar. It made something inside me twist painfully, because she had taken my place so completely, so perfectly, that even I couldn't deny it. She looked at them with warmth, with care, with something that almost resembled love. And for a brief second, a dangerous thought crossed my mind. What if they were happy? What if, despite everything, they had lived a good life, a safe life, a loved life? Would I still have the right to take that away? To step in and shatter everything they knew just to reclaim what was mine? The thought lingered, heavy and complicated, but it didn't change my resolve. Because this wasn't just about happiness. It was about truth. And truth matters, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. I stepped back slowly, retreating into the shadows, my eyes never leaving them, memorizing every detail, every movement, every expression, because this time, I wouldn't lose sight of them, not again, not ever. And as I turned away, my mind already working, already planning the next step, one thought remained clear, unwavering. They may not know me yet, but I will find my way back to them. They gave my children everything except the truth. I told myself that over and over again as I stood across the street, hidden just enough to not be noticed, but close enough to see everything clearly, because what I saw didn't match the image I had built in my mind. It wasn't cold, it wasn't cruel, it wasn't the kind of life I could easily tear apart without hesitation. It was warm, structured, almost perfect in a way that made things harder, not easier. Laura wasn't careless, she wasn't reckless, she had built something stable, something convincing, something that even I, knowing the truth, had to acknowledge. She laughed with them, spoke to them gently, her hand resting on their shoulders like it belonged there, like it had always belonged there. And that was the problem, because in their world it had. I followed them for days after that, not closely, never close enough to risk being seen, but always within reach, always watching, learning, understanding the rhythm of their lives the same way I had studied the hospital. Patterns again, everything comes down to patterns. School in the morning, activities in the afternoon, dinners together in the evening, weekends filled with outings, small routines that build trust, build attachment, build something that isn't easy to break. And every time I saw it, every time I watched them smile, laugh, interact with her, something inside me twisted tighter, not just with anger, but with something more complicated, something I didn't want to admit. Because Laura hadn't just stolen them, she had raised them well. And that made everything harder. Because if they had been neglected, unloved, mistreated, I could have stepped in without hesitation. I could have taken them back and told myself I was saving them. But this wasn't rescue. This was disruption. And disruption has consequences, especially for children who don't understand the truth yet. One afternoon, I saw something that changed everything. Something small but enough. Enough to remind me why I couldn't hesitate. Why I couldn't let sympathy cloud what needed to be done. One of the boys, the quieter one, the one who had caught my attention before, stood slightly apart from the others, his expression thoughtful, distant, like he didn't fully belong in the moment. Laura called his name, her voice warm, encouraging, but he didn't respond immediately. Just a slight delay, barely noticeable to anyone else. But to me it was everything, because I recognized that look, that distance, that quiet separation. It was mine. It was something I had seen in myself countless times, something that didn't come from environment alone, but from something deeper, something inherited. And in that moment, there was no doubt left, no uncertainty, just certainty. They were mine, both of them, completely, undeniably. And whatever life they had built here, it was built on something stolen. That clarity cut through the hesitation, through the conflict, through the part of me that wanted to believe things could stay as they were. Because they couldn't. Not like this. Not when the foundation itself was a lie. I moved closer that day. Just a little. Enough to hear more. To see more clearly. And that's when I noticed it. The second crack not in them but in her. Laura's expression shifted when she thought no one was looking. Just for a second. Just a flicker. But it was their tension. Not the calm control she usually carried. But something tighter. Something strained. Like she was holding something together that was starting to slip. And that was when I understood something else. Something important. She wasn't as secure as she appeared this life. This perfect image. It required maintenance control. Constant attention. Because lies don't hold themselves up forever. They need effort. They need reinforcement. And that meant she was vulnerable. Not in the way I had expected, but in a way I could use. That evening, I returned home with a different mindset. The hesitation got replaced by something clearer. More focused. This wasn't about whether I had the right to take them back. This was about how I would do it without destroying them in the process. Because they were still my children. And protecting them didn't just mean keeping them safe physically. It meant protecting their minds, their emotions, their sense of stability. Even as I prepared to change everything, I sat in the quiet of my room that night. My children sleeping beside me. The ones I had saved this time. The ones who had been almost taken again. And I looked at them for a long time. Because they were part of this too. Part of the future I was building. Part of the life I refused to lose again. And in that silence, I started to map it out. Not just revenge. Not just exposure. But transition. A way to bring the truth to light without breaking everything at once. A way to pull my children back to me slowly, carefully. In a way they could accept, understand. Eventually choose. Because forcing it would only create resistance. And resistance could push them further away. I needed them to come to me. Not be taken. And that required time, patience, precision. The same things that had been used against me before, but now. They were mine to use. I leaned back slightly. Closing my eyes for just a moment, not to rest. But to focus. To solidify the plan forming in my mind. Because once I started this, there would be no going back. No hesitation. No second guessing. And as I opened my eyes again, staring into the quiet darkness, one thought settled in, steady and absolute. I won't destroy their world, I'll replace it. He didn't make a mistake, he chose this. The realization didn't come from one moment. It came from a series of small details that aligned too perfectly to ignore. The way Daniel avoided certain questions. The way his timing never quite matched the story he told. The way he watched me sometimes. Not with concern, but with quiet calculation. Like he was measuring something. Waiting for something. And now that I was paying attention. Really paying attention. I could see it clearly. The man I had trusted for years had never been as unaware as he pretended to be. And that changed everything. Because betrayal born from ignorance is one thing. But betrayal born from choice, that's something else entirely. Something colder. Something harder to forgive. Not that forgiveness was even part of this anymore. I wasn't here to forgive. I was here to uncover, to prove. To dismantle everything they had built on lies. And Daniel was the next piece I needed to understand. I didn't confront him. Not directly, not yet. Confrontation without leverage is just noise. And I needed leverage. Something solid. Something undeniable, so instead, I played the same role I had perfected since returning, calm, quiet, predictable. Letting him believe nothing had changed. Letting him move freely. Because people reveal themselves when they think no one is watching. And this time I was watching everything. It started with something simple, his phone. Not the content, not yet. But the behavior. The way he kept it closer than before. The way he angled the screen away slightly when messages came in. The subtle tension in his posture when I entered the room unexpectedly. Small things, but patterns form from small things. And patterns tell stories if you know how to read them. One evening, I made my move. Again subtle. Again controlled. "You've been busy," I said casually as he sat down across from me. My tone light. Almost indifferent. Not accusatory. Not suspicious. Just observant. He paused for a fraction of a second. Barely noticeable, but enough work. He replied simply. Not elaborating. Not offering more than necessary. And I nodded. As if satisfied. As if I didn't care enough to push further. But I watched him. The way his fingers tapped lightly against the table. The way his gaze shifted briefly. These weren't the reactions of someone relaxed. Someone innocent. They were the reactions of someone managing something. Controlling something. Hiding something. I let the conversation drop after that. Because pushing would only make him more cautious. More guarded. And I needed him comfortable. I needed him to believe he was still in control. That nothing had changed. That I was still the same woman he had manipulated before. Because the moment he senses otherwise, he adapts. And I wasn't ready for that yet. The next step came the following day. When he left for work, I waited. Not immediately. Patience matters. Timing matters. And once I was sure he was gone, I moved, not rushed. Not hesitant. Just precise. I went straight to his study. The one place he spent the most time in. the one place he considered private, safe, untouched. And that was exactly why I started there. People hide things where they feel most secure, not where they feel most exposed. The room was exactly as I remembered, organized, controlled. Nothing out of place, but that didn't mean nothing was hidden. I searched carefully, not randomly, not desperately, but with intention, focusing on the details the drawer that was slightly harder to open, the file that didn't align perfectly with the others, the small inconsistencies that most people overlook. But eventually I found it. Not something obvious, not a clear confession, but something better, something more useful, a record. Financial transactions, small amounts at first glance, but repeated, consistent, directed toward the same account, an account that didn't belong to any official service or known contact. And when I traced it further, when I followed the pattern, the name appeared, not directly, but indirectly, hidden behind layers, but still there, Laura. The connection was undeniable, not coincidence, not random, but deliberate, sustained, planned. My fingers tightened slightly around the paper, not from shock, not from anger, but from confirmation. This was it, the proof I needed. Not everything, not yet, but enough to establish a link, enough to show that Daniel wasn't just involved, he was invested financially, intentionally. I placed everything back exactly as I found it, no signs, no traces. Because this wasn't the moment to reveal what I knew. This was the moment to gather more, to build something stronger, something that couldn't be denied or twisted. That night, when he returned, I watched him differently, not as a husband, not as someone I shared a life with, but as a subjective variable, a piece in a larger structure I was dismantling step by step. He spoke, asked questions, maintained the same careful normality he always had, and I responded just enough to keep the illusion intact, because the less he suspected, the more he would reveal, and I needed him to reveal everything, not just for revenge, but for control, because once I moved, once I exposed everything, there would be no room for error, no room for doubt. And as I lay there that night, my children sleeping beside me, the quiet steady, the world calm on the surface, my mind remained sharp, focused, building, because now I knew something I hadn't known before, something that changed the entire game. This wasn't just Laura's plan, Daniel had chosen to be part of it. And that meant he had something to lose, something I could take. And as that thought settled in, cold and precise, one truth became clear. I wasn't just taking my children back, I was taking everything he thought belonged to him. If they planned once, can fall twice. The difference now was simple, but absolute. The first time, I had been the one unaware, the one reacting, the one trying to survive a reality that had already been shaped without me. But this time, I was the one shaping it quietly, carefully, step by step. And that meant I didn't need to rush. I didn't need to confront them directly, because the strongest traps aren't the ones you see coming. They're the ones you walk into willingly, believing you're still in control. And that was exactly what I was going to give them: control, or at least the illusion of it. I started small, just like they had. Subtle changes, barely noticeable shifts in behavior, conversations placed carefully, information released in fragments. Nothing obvious, nothing that could be traced back to intent, but enough to create pressure, enough to make them react. Because reaction is where truth slips through. I brought up the idea casually one evening, sitting across from Daniel, as if it were nothing more than a passing thought. The hospital mentioned follow-up tests, I said, my tone light, almost indifferent, not watching him directly, but aware of every movement, every pause. Routine checks, maybe even DNA. Just to be thorough, I let the words settle naturally, not emphasizing them, not forcing a reaction, because forced reactions can be controlled, but natural ones, those are harder to hide. And he reacted, just slightly, just enough. His hand stilled for a fraction of a second. His eyes flickered, a micro-expression most people would miss, but not me, not anymore. That seems unnecessary. He replied too quickly, too firmly for something he claimed didn't matter. And I nodded slowly, as if considering his point, as if I hadn't already noticed everything I needed to see. Maybe. I said softly, letting it drop, letting him believe the idea had passed. But ideas don't disappear once they're planted, they grow. They create tension. They force decisions. And that was the goal. Not the test itself, but the reaction to it. The next step was Laura. Because if Daniel was involved, then Laura would feel the shift too. Information flows between people connected by secrets, even when they don't speak directly. Pressure on one side creates movement on the other. And I needed that movement. I needed her to act, to reveal something she wouldn't if left alone. So I made sure the idea reached her. Not directly, never directly, but through channels, through conversations that seemed accidental, through people who didn't realize they were carrying something important. By the time it reached her, it wouldn't feel like my move. It would feel like a threat from somewhere else, something unpredictable, something she couldn't control. And that's when people make mistakes. I didn't have to wait long. Within days, the shift was visible. Subtle at first, but undeniable. Daniel was more cautious, more distant, his movements more controlled, like he was trying to stay ahead of something he couldn't fully see. And Laura, she changed too. Her composure still intact on the surface, but the cracks were there if you knew where to look. The slight tension in her posture, the way her gaze lingered just a moment too long when she thought no one noticed. The way she adjusted her plans, her schedule, her routines, all signs of someone reacting, not controlling, and that was exactly where I needed her. Reacting means adapting, and adapting means making choices, and choices leave evidence. The moment came sooner than I expected, but not sooner than I was ready for. I was watching from a distance again, the same place, the same angle. When I saw it, Laura speaking with someone near her car, not casually, not comfortably, but urgently, her movements sharp, controlled but strained. And the person she was speaking to, I recognized her instantly, the nurse. The same one from the hospital, the same one who had hesitated, who had looked at me with fear she couldn't hide completely. And now she was here, outside the hospital, outside her role, connected directly to Laura, confirming everything, not just suspicion, not just theory but reality. They weren't just involved, they were still connected, still active, still trying to maintain whatever they had built. I stayed where I was watching, memorizing, not moving, not interrupting, because this was exactly what I needed, a link, a visible, undeniable connection between them, something that couldn't be explained away easily, something that could be traced, proven, used. Laura handed her something small, discreet, money most likely. The same pattern, the same method, control through payment, silence through fear, but this time I had seen it, and seeing it meant it existed beyond their control now, because knowledge is power, and I was collecting it piece by piece, carefully, deliberately, until there was enough to bring everything down at once. I stepped back slowly after they separated, my mind already moving, already connecting, already planning the next phase, because this wasn't the end of the trip. This was just the moment they stepped into it. And once you step into something like that, getting out isn't easy, not when someone else is controlling the exit. And as I walked away, my expression calm, my movements steady, one thought settled in, clear and final. They thought they were covering their tracks, but all they're doing is leading me straight to the truth. They're perfect. Worlds started breaking. It didn't happen all at once, not in some dramatic explosion the way stories like to pretend. It started quietly, almost invisibly, like a crack forming beneath the surface. Small at first, easy to ignore, but once it's there, it spreads, it deepens. And eventually, everything built on top of it begins to shift, to weaken, to collapse under its own weight. And that was exactly what I was creating, not chaos, not yet, but pressure, controlled, deliberate pressure applied at just the right points, enough to destabilize, enough to force them into making mistakes they couldn't take back. I didn't expose everything immediately. That would have been too easy to deny, too easy to contain. Instead, I released fragments, carefully chosen pieces of truth placed where they would do the most damage, whispers, questions, inconsistencies brought to light in ways that couldn't be traced back to me. Because the strongest attack isn't the one that comes from the front, it's the one that makes your enemy destroy themselves from within. The hospital was the first to react. Small internal checks, quiet reviews of records that had been left untouched for years. Nothing public, nothing official, but enough to create tension among the staff, enough to make people nervous. Because once attention returns to something that was supposed to stay buried, fear follows. And fear spreads faster than truth ever could. I heard about it through the same channels I had been using, indirect, subtle, but reliable. The nurse, the one who had been paid, the one who had already shown signs of breaking. She was being questioned, not aggressively, not yet, but enough to shake her, enough to remind her that what she had done wasn't as hidden as she believed. And people like her, they don't hold under pressure. Not for long, not when the cost of silence starts to outweigh the reward. Laura felt it too. I could see it in the way she moved now, the way her control slipped just slightly in moments she thought no one noticed, the way her patience wore thinner, her reactions sharper, more immediate, less calculated. She was still holding everything together, still maintaining the image she had built, but it was taking more effort now, more focus. And that effort, it shows always. I crossed paths with her deliberately one afternoon, not by accident, never by accident, but arranged just enough to seem natural, inevitable. And when our eyes met, I saw it clearly, not fear, not yet, but awareness, the kind that comes when you realize something has changed, something you can't fully see or understand, but know is there, watching, waiting. We should talk sometime, she said, her voice calm, composed, but there was something beneath it now, something tighter, something searching, and I smiled slightly, just controlled enough to give her nothing. Maybe, I replied, letting the word hang without commitment, without emotion, because I wasn't ready to talk, not on her terms, not in a way she could prepare for. This conversation would happen, but it would happen when she had no way out. Daniel was different. His cracks showed in quieter ways, more internal, more restrained, but no less real. He had started watching me more closely now, the roles shifting without him fully realizing it. Because the moment he felt something was wrong, something beyond his control, he couldn't ignore it anymore. "You've been different," he said one night, his tone careful, measured, testing. And I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time without any pretense behind my eyes. Just for a second, just enough to let something slip through. Not the truth, not fully, but enough to unsettle him. "Have I asked softly, and that was all it took. Because uncertainty is more dangerous than accusation. Accusation can be denied, defended against, but uncertainty, it lingers, it grows. It forces people to question everything, even themselves. The final piece came sooner than expected, but not before I had everything I needed. The nurse broke, not completely, not publicly, but enough. Enough to speak, enough to confirm, enough to become the weak point in the structure Laura and Daniel had relied on for so long. I didn't hear it directly. I didn't need to. The shift in behavior, the sudden urgency, the way Laura moved faster, reacted sharper, it told me everything. Something had slipped, something had been said, and once something like that happens, you can't take it back. I stood in the quiet of my room that night, my children asleep, the world still, but the tension in the air unmistakable. Because this was it, the turning point, the moment where everything they had built started to unravel beyond repair. Not because I forced it, but because I guided it carefully, precisely, exactly where I wanted it to go. And as I looked out into the darkness, my reflection staring back at me, calm, steady, unshaken, one thought settled in, clear and inevitable. They thought they were protecting their world, but all they did was build it on something that was never meant to last. "This time I don't lose." The words didn't come out loud. They didn't need to. They settled somewhere deeper, somewhere steady and unshakable, because everything had already been set in motion. Every piece placed exactly where it needed to be. Every truth brought just close enough to the surface that all it would take now was one final push. And everything would come crashing down. Not suddenly, not chaotically, but inevitably, like something that had been waiting to collapse all along. The room felt different that morning, heavier, charged, like the air itself knew something was about to change. And maybe it did, because tension has a way of filling space, of making even silence feel loud. I stood there with my children close, their warmth grounding me, reminding me why I had done all of this, why I had endured, planned, waited. Because this was never just about revenge. It was about truth, about reclaiming what had been taken, about making sure that this time, nothing would be stolen from me again. Laura arrived first, composed as always, her posture perfect, her expression controlled, but the cracks were there now, subtle, but undeniable, the kind that only appear when someone knows they're no longer fully in control. Daniel came shortly after, his movements slower, more cautious, his eyes searching, trying to read something he couldn't quite understand. And the others followed, staff, observers, people drawn in by whispers that had grown too loud to ignore. It wasn't a public spectacle, not officially, but it might as well have been, because once truth starts to surface, people pay attention. I didn't rush. I didn't speak immediately. I let the silence build, let the weight of the moment settle over everyone in the room, because silence can be more powerful than words when used correctly. And when I finally stepped forward, my voice calm, steady, it carried without force, without effort. 25 years, I said, not looking at anyone in particular, but feeling every gaze turn toward me. That's how long a lie can live if no one questions it. The words hung there, simple but heavy, because truth doesn't need complexity. It just needs to be undeniable. I didn't accuse, not directly, not yet. Instead, I presented, piece by piece, the altered records, the inconsistencies, the financial transactions, the connections that had once been hidden but were now impossible to ignore. I watched as their expressions shifted, as control gave way to tension, as certainty gave way to doubt. Because doubt is where collapse begins. Laura stepped forward eventually, her voice still composed, still controlled, but tighter now, sharper. "You're making assumptions," she said, and I almost smiled, because that was expected. Denial always comes first. Am I replied softly, and then I let the final piece fall into place. Not dramatically, not forcefully, but simply. "Then explain the payment," I said, my gaze steady, unflinching. Because this wasn't about proving I was right anymore. It was about showing that they couldn't prove I was wrong. The silence that followed was different, heavier, final in a way the previous silence hadn't been. Because now there was no easy way out, no simple denial, no quick explanation that could erase everything that had been revealed. Daniel's composure broke first, just slightly, just enough. His eyes shifting, his posture tightening, and that was all it took. Because once one piece moves, the rest follow. Laura tried to hold it together, tried to maintain the image she had built, but even she couldn't stop the cracks from spreading now, not when the foundation itself had been exposed. The nurse spoke eventually, quietly, hesitantly, but enough to confirm what had already been laid bare, enough to turn suspicion into certainty. And in that moment, everything changed, not loudly, not explosively, but definitively. Because truth, once acknowledged, doesn't go back into hiding, it stays, it lingers. It reshapes everything around it. I didn't look at them after that. Not immediately. Because this wasn't about them anymore, not really. It was about what came next. And what came next was harder. I turned instead, slowly, deliberately, toward the door, toward the space beyond it. Because that was where the real challenge waited. Not exposure, not revenge, but connection. Two boys stood there, uncertain, confused, drawn in by something they didn't fully understand. And for a moment, everything else faded. Because this was what mattered most, my children. My real children, standing just a few steps away. And yet so far, so impossibly far. Because truth doesn't create instant bonds. It doesn't rewrite years of memory. It doesn't erase the life they've already lived. And as their eyes met mine, searching, unsure, I felt it. Not the certainty I had carried until now, but something softer, something more fragile, hope, mixed with fear. Because this wasn't a battle I could win with evidence or strategy. This was something else entirely. Something that would take time, patience. Something I couldn't control the way I had controlled everything else. One of them stepped forward, slightly hesitant, like he was trying to understand something he couldn't put into words. And I didn't move, didn't reach out, didn't force anything, because forcing it now would only push them. And I had already lost them once. I wouldn't risk that again. You don't have to understand everything today, I said softly, my voice gentler now, different from before, because this wasn't about proving anything. But you deserve to know the truth. They didn't respond immediately, and I didn't expect them to. Because truth like this, it takes time. It needs space. It needs to be processed, accepted, chosen. And as I stood there, the room behind me still heavy, with the collapse of everything that had once seemed unbreakable, I realized something important. This wasn't the end, not really. It was a beginning, a difficult, uncertain, complicated beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. And as I looked at them, really looked at them, not as something I had lost, but as something I could still find my way back to, one thought remained steady, patient, unshaken. I didn't just come back for revenge, I came back for them, and this time, I'll earn my place in their lives, no matter how long it takes.